Starting to tank in Final Fantasy XIV was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not only did it feel more engaging and increase my love for the battles, I honestly believe it heightened the experience you can have in the game. What you're seeing now isn't me tanking, but my son. Through the culmination of many conversations and overcoming his own fears and self-doubt to get him to a place where he's our main tank now. So today, you're gonna find out why I made my son the main tank, how we dealt with his fear of tanking, and the result that tanking helped him reach peak enjoyment in the game. Now, be honest with me. Does the idea of tanking give some of you instant anxiety or put some of you into a cold sweat? Yeah, me neither. For many, it gets to a point where leveling any tank is a real stressor, and for my son it was the same. But as his dad, I knew that this was a life lesson he needed to learn that would translate into every other area of his life. No joke, if I were to let him stay afraid of tanking in a silly video game, that would translate into the real world, because just because it was online and on a screen, it doesn't mean he isn't dealing with real people. People can get mad, freak out on him, and all around make him feel stupid. But if he could conquer this, like in many things, a small victory here will lead to larger victories later on. I knew he needed to do this. I knew that he could do this. So before we jump back into the game, we talked this through. The issues, the fears, the advantages, the disadvantages, and how we were gonna face this together. I broke it down into 3 steps. First, laying out what he was anxious about. Second, break down the issue into a smaller, more manageable issue that can be dealt with. Third, expose him with the new understanding that we don't get less afraid, we just get a little braver. So the first thing we did was talk about what made him anxious about tanking. What was he afraid of? What might happen? And like many things, his fear stemmed from real life bullying. Like all of us, we've all faced jerks in our lives. We all have memories of that one guy or girl that made us feel small. This started seeping into other areas of his life that prevented him from experiencing joy. And in Final Fantasy XIV, it seeped into his fear that everyone would see how bad he was at this game. An understandable issue, especially when you're just a teenager, but also something that with a little perspective shift could be overcome with just one thing that I tell my boys often. How do we get good at anything? Practice. So we talked about breaking down this fear and eventually practicing to overcome it, one step at a time. We started by talking about the fear of being bad at tanking, that if something goes wrong, it'll be his fault. There's a psychological phenomenon called the spotlight effect. It's a notion where we overestimate the degree to which other people are noticing our actions, behaviors, and appearances. It's believing we are player one in every situation and that our perspective of importance is the only perspective. A study was done where psychologists got students to wear a ridiculous t-shirt around school and asked them to estimate how many people would notice. The students estimated 50%, when in reality only 25% did. We think that everyone is staring at how we do things, like tanking in a raid, when in reality they aren't. And even if they do, people quickly forget and focus on themselves. Thus his fear that everyone will be looking and judging his tanking skills was unnecessary and unrealistic. It also was a little egotistical, and in the end, preventing him from enjoying the game for fear of judgment. So we broke it down into a smaller, more manageable issue. I told him that this was overcome by being aware that everyone is too busy looking at what they're doing to notice anyone else. Awareness. Everyone else is feeling this way, so how can they possibly notice you? They can't. Next, focus instead on doing your job and encouraging others in theirs. Thank the healer. Call out people who are kind and funny. Be positive, because that breeds more positivity. This will get his focus away from thinking everyone's looking at him or his failings, and would get him to focus on other people. And finally, that if things go wrong, so what? People are pretty gracious for the most part and move on pretty fast to their next experience. That the worst case scenarios are only in our heads. We suffer more in our imaginations than in reality. So after digging into the issue and realizing what was really going on in his head, it was time for me to take him into the game with a new understanding and a better perspective on what was really happening. To 1, be aware that people aren't focusing on him but themselves. 2, focus on others instead. And 3, enjoy the run, because what's the worst that could happen? Reminding him that he wasn't alone, that I was going to be there with him every step of the way, and that in the end, it's just a game. So we started with our dailies and then went on to our MSQ. It went better than he ever imagined. And when he made a mistake, no one noticed. Being that I was the healer, I spent a lot of time spam healing, so no worries there. The results came in with him having more confidence and realizing that tanking actually isn't that hard, and that he actually kind of liked being in the middle of all the action. And if we wiped, it was no big deal. He spent time encouraging others and remembering that, so what? If we wipe, we wipe. So with practice, he realized what I said earlier, that this doesn't lead to less fear, but leads to more bravery, that there is a difference. The worry doesn't leave you. You're just overcoming it, facing it despite what you feel. There's something in us that gets stronger with every attempt. And it also leads to more adventure, more excitement, as well as a better self-perspective and a feeling of pride in yourself. All things that translate into the real world, not just Eorzea. So with that, my son started liking setting the pace in the dungeons, getting good at remembering mechanics, and most of all, not having to wait in any queues. So as I taught my son to not fear tanking, I say the same to you. Give it a try. You might like it.